I want you to imagine, just for a second, that you are staring up at this massive illuminated map of a colossal country.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
Let's say it's India. But
Mhm.
there's a catch with this map. You can only easily access the places that are glowing with bright, vibrant lights.
Right.
And as you look at it, you realize the light is incredibly concentrated. You've got this blinding cluster of economic activity around Delhi, a massive beacon over Mumbai, another huge spotlight on Bengaluru.
The big metros.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the rest of the map, the thousands of vibrant, culturally rich, historically significant towns and regions, they're mostly just sitting in the dark.
Yeah, which is a pretty common problem, honestly.
Right, but over the last 9 years, there's this multi-billion rupee initiative called the UDAN scheme, and it has been actively wiring those dark spots into the grid.
Which is just a massive undertaking.
It really is. So our mission today for this deep dive is based on a stack of recent infrastructure data and this really comprehensive April 2026 policy review of that UDAN scheme.
Mhm.
And we were going to see exactly how India is unlocking its own geography.
Yeah, and that geographical inequality you just described with the map, I mean, it's something a lot of growing nations face.
Oh, absolutely.
Because when those gaps in the map remain isolated, everything from, economic growth to tourism to even specialized healthcare, it all struggles to reach those darker areas.
Simply because getting there is such a massive logistical hurdle.
Exactly. It becomes this sort of self-perpetuating cycle of isolation. You can't grow because you're isolated, and you're isolated because you haven't grown.
Right. So we are turning what usually sounds like a very dry subject government infrastructure funding into a story of how you actually rewire the economic and social circulation of an entire nation.
Which is fascinating when you really get into the mechanics of it.
It is. But to really understand how India is expanding its skies today, we first have to understand why those skies over the smaller cities were empty to begin with.
Right, the historical context.
Yeah. Historically, like we saw on our imaginary map, Indian aviation was completely dominated by the massive metros. But small cities actually had airstrips.
Yeah, they were there.
They were just sitting there completely unused. So let's unpack this. Let's look at the actual math of a commercial flight to figure out why no one was using them.
Well, the math is notoriously unforgiving. I mean,
Yeah.
for an airline, operating a flight with low passenger volume is just a guaranteed rapid financial loss.
Because of the overhead.
Exactly. You have massive fixed costs. You've got the leasing cost of the aircraft, the highly trained crew, the strict maintenance schedules, the insurance,
Yeah.
and all of those financial burdens remain exactly the same, whether the plane is packed to the brim or flying at like 10% capacity.
So the airlines had absolutely zero financial incentive to take a risk on a route to a smaller, untested town.
None at all. I mean, the free market was never going to solve this on its own.
Right. Enter the UDAN scheme, which stands for Ude Desh Aam Nagrik, translating to let the common citizen of the country fly.
A great name, by the way.
It really is. So the way they solve this economic deadlock revolves around a mechanism called viability gap funding, or VGF. And I think it helps to think of it less like an aviation policy and more like municipal transit.
How so?
Well, imagine your local city wants to open up a brand new bus line to a remote neighborhood on the outskirts of town. On day one, hardly anyone is going to ride that bus.
Yeah, because the habit isn't there yet.
Exactly. So if a private company ran it, they'd go bankrupt in a week and cancel the route. But the city needs that neighborhood connected to the downtown jobs.
Right, for the broader economy.
Exactly. So the city subsidizes the private bus company. They cover the operational losses so the tickets stay cheap for the riders.
And because the tickets are cheap, people start taking the bus.
Yep. Over a few years, businesses open along the route, people start commuting regularly, they build a lifestyle around it, and eventually the route becomes a bustling, self-sustaining artery that no longer needs the subsidy.
It becomes profitable on its own.
Exactly. That is viability gap funding in a nutshell.
And just like that city bus, the UDAN scheme uses that viability gap funding to temporarily shield airlines from those brutal fixed costs we just talked about.
Right.
So the government steps in to subsidize the airlines to operate routes that just wouldn't initially be profitable. But the brilliance of the scheme is how that financial burden is shared.
Oh, because it's not just the central government, right?
Exactly. It is a strict team effort between the central government and the state governments. The states have to have serious skin in the game here.
Like what? What do the states actually do?
Well, they commit to significantly reducing the value-added tax on aviation turbine fuel down to 1% or even less.
Wow, that's a huge cut.
It is. And they also waive landing and parking charges at these regional airports.
Okay.
So in exchange for all of this financial padding, the airlines are legally required to cap the fares on a specific portion of the seats, making them affordable for the everyday citizen.
Okay, wait, let me stop you there, because I'm getting stuck on the math here from the state's perspective.
Sure.
If a state government slashes the fuel tax to virtually nothing,
Mhm.
and they completely waive the landing fees, aren't they just eating massive, unsustainable losses to subsidize the profit margins of private airlines?
It does look like that at first glance.
Right. I mean, how does the state actually win here? It sounds a bit like corporate welfare.
That's a really crucial distinction to make because, yes, it looks like a loss on the aviation ledger, but the state is playing a much larger macroeconomic game.
Okay.
They're looking at the downstream economic multiplier. When you land a commercial flight in a previously isolated town, you aren't just bringing tourists.
Right, you're bringing business.
Exactly. You are bringing business investors who wouldn't have taken a 10-hour train ride. You are enabling quick transport of time-sensitive cargo.
Ah, I see.
So the tax revenue generated from the new hotels, the new restaurants, the increased business efficiency, and just the overall economic velocity, it far outweighs the lost landing fees.
Wow.
The state isn't just buying a flight, they're buying an entire supply chain and injecting it into a local economy.
That reframes it completely. So they are artificially lowering the barrier to entry so that short-haul flying becomes an economic catalyst,
Precisely.
which naturally makes you wonder, did this theoretical financial experiment actually work? Because subsidies sound great in white papers, but did it change the real world over the last 9 years?
The data speaks for itself, honestly.
Yeah, I was looking at the infrastructure data in our sources, and the scale is wild. As of February 2026, they have operationalized 663 routes across 95 airports, heliports, and water aerodromes.
Massive.
They've operated over 340,000 flights, carrying 16.2 million passengers.
Wow.
And India's overall airport network grew from just 74 airports in 2014 to 159 airports in 2024.
Let's translate those numbers into human impact, though. Because 16.2 million passengers isn't just a volume metric. Think about the time saved.
Right, the actual hours.
Yeah, if a regional flight saves an average of, say, 10 hours of travel time compared to a winding mountain road or a multi-day train journey, we're talking about hundreds of millions of human hours given back to the economy.
That's incredible to think about.
Hours that can be spent working, producing, or simply being with family instead of just sitting in transit.
Yeah, I see the sheer volume there. But let me play the skeptic for a second.
Go for it.
Because we've all seen governments globally pour concrete, build massive airports in the middle of nowhere, cut a ribbon for the cameras, and then 10 years later, it's a quote-unquote ghost airport with weeds growing through the runway.
Yeah, the white elephant projects.
Exactly. Are these just vanity projects? I mean, it's easy for a government to build an airport, but it's hard to make it useful. Are everyday people actually using them?
What's fascinating here is the strategy preventing these from becoming ghost airports. It's a concept called infrastructure recycling.
Infrastructure recycling.
Yeah. UDAN hasn't just been pouring billions into brand new, massive greenfield mega airports. A massive portion of this initiative relies on strategically reviving dormant airstrips.
Right, so think of it less like building new airports and more like turning the lights back on in a house that's been sitting empty since 1945.
Exactly, because a lot of these are often World War II era airstrips.
Yeah, the sources mentioned that they already have the foundational concrete poured.
Right, they just need modern avionics, a fresh coat of asphalt, and an updated air traffic control setup.
Which drops the capital expenditure to a fraction of a new build.
The capital expenditure reduction is huge, but the real secret weapon of infrastructure recycling is time.
How so?
Anyone who follows global infrastructure knows that land acquisition is the single biggest bottleneck. Buying the land, navigating local zoning laws, getting environmental clearances.
Oh yeah, they can take forever.
It can take a decade before a single shovel hits the dirt. But by using airstrips where the government already owns the land, they completely bypass a decade of red tape.
Wow.
That is how a country doubles its operational airports from 74 to 159 in just 10 years.
It makes so much sense.
And when you see those 16.2 million passengers utilizing these specific routes, it proves the latent economic energy was always real. The people in these communities wanted to fly, The market just hadn't offered them the right price point yet.
Right, so we know the macro statistics. Millions of people are flying. But to really grasp the engineering and logistical hurdles here, we have to move from the macro to the micro.
Down to the ground level.
Exactly. Let's look at the actual geography they're conquering. Instead of just listing off the new airports, let's look at two specific examples from the source material that highlight how different these challenges are.
Okay, sounds good.
Let's start with Agadi in Lakshadweep. This is a coral reef archipelago in the Arabian Sea.
Right.
It's one thing to build an airport in a flat field in the Midwest, but how do you even run an aviation network over a coral reef?
Well, Agadi is a masterclass in overcoming geographical isolation. Before consistent air connectivity, you were looking at a ship journey from the mainland city of Kochi that could take anywhere from 14 to 20 hours.
Oh my God.
Yeah, depending on the weather in the Arabian Sea, which can be rough. But by establishing the Agadi route under UDAN, you shrink a grueling multi-day ocean transit into a roughly 90-minute flight.
That is life-changing.
It is. You aren't just moving passengers. You are establishing a high-speed supply chain over the ocean. It completely changes the perishable goods market. Fresh medical supplies can arrive daily instead of weekly.
Wow. And then the physical environment on the exact other end of the spectrum is Shimla in the northern state of Himachal Pradesh.
Right, up in the mountains.
Yeah, you are going from sea-level coral reefs to the deep Himalayas. Anyone who has looked into Indian hill stations knows Shimla for its colonial-era architecture and its massive apple orchards.
It's beautiful.
But flying commercial aircraft into the Himalayas is notoriously difficult.
It is. The aeronautical challenge in places like Shimla is what the industry calls hot and high conditions, though in Shimla's case, it's mostly the high altitude. At higher elevations, the air is significantly thinner. Thinner air means less lift generated by the aircraft's wings and less oxygen for the engines to burn, which reduces thrust.
So the planes literally struggle to fly.
Exactly. To safely take off and land in thin air, a plane needs a much longer runway.
Which you don't usually have in the mountains.
Right. If you don't have a long runway, the aircraft has to fly with a massive load penalty.
Meaning what, exactly?
Meaning the airline has to purposefully leave seats empty to keep the plane light enough to take off safely.
Oh, wow. Which brings us right back to the economics of empty skies.
Exactly.
If an airline has a 50-seat plane, but physics dictates they can only safely sell 30 seats to get out of the mountains, their profit margin vanishes before the engine even starts.
Yep.
No wonder the market failed to connect these towns. The viability gap funding bridges the gap between what physics allows the airline to sell and what the airline needs to stay in business.
It's a perfect synthesis of physics and economics. The subsidy directly compensates for the realities of the terrain.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. I have to push back on the narrative a little bit here.
Okay, let's hear it.
Let's look at the destinations we just highlighted. Coral reefs in Lakshadweep, Victorian architecture, and apple orchards in Shimla. Other cities mentioned in the 2026 report include Hubli as a gateway to heritage ruins and Diogar for massive religious pilgrimages.
Right.
This all sounds amazing for tourists looking for coral reefs or temples. But is this massive government scheme effectively just a taxpayer-funded subsidy for vacationers to get to their resorts faster?
That is a very common critique. The tourism aspect is highly visible, which invites that exact question.
Right.
But if you look at the daily manifests of these flights, especially in the northeastern states, the island territories, and the hill regions, you see a completely different reality.
Okay, what's the reality?
For the permanent residents of these regions, flying isn't a luxury. It is a practical necessity for healthcare, trade, and tourism.
Give me a real-world scenario where a regional flight is a necessity, outside of tourism.
The most glaring example is healthcare. If you live in a remote mountain town in the Himalayas and experience a severe cardiac event or require specialized neonatal care, a winding 10-hour drive down mountain roads is simply a death sentence.
Oh, God, yeah.
A 40-minute subsidized flight changes that equation entirely.
That makes perfect sense.
And the same applies to local business. If you are an apple farmer in Shimla and a landslide blocks the main highway, which happens frequently during monsoon season, your entire harvest rots in trucks.
Because you can't get it to market.
Exactly. Air connectivity provides a critical cold chain alternative for high-value agricultural goods.
Wow.
Yes, the tourists fill seats and bring vital revenue to those local economies, but the bedrock of the scheme is providing essential, necessary infrastructure to citizens who were previously marooned by their own geography.
So the tourists essentially act as the economic engine that subsidizes the life-saving infrastructure for the locals.
That's a great way to look at it.
That is a brilliant way to structure a policy.
Yeah.
And knowing that profound impact, it makes the latest updates from April 2026 even more compelling.
The recent numbers are pretty staggering.
Yeah. The Prime Minister's recent announcements show they're looking at what worked and deciding to tackle even more extreme geographical challenges. We're looking at a fresh commitment of an additional 10,043 crore rupees in airline subsidies just to keep these regional routes running and expanding.
The 2026 horizon is a massive doubling down. They are planning to build 100 new airports from existing unused airstrips, continuing that successful recycling model we talked about.
Right. But the detail in the source material that really stopped me in my tracks is the plan for 200 new helipads,
Yes.
specifically earmarked for remote, hilly, and hard-to-reach areas. So what does this all mean? This totally changes the definition of regional travel. We aren't just talking about city-to-city commuting anymore. We are talking about connecting literal mountaintops.
Absolutely. Think about it. A runway, even a small one, requires a massive amount of flat, stable land. Finding that in highly mountainous or densely forested terrain is practically impossible without devastating the local environment.
You'd have to clear-cut a forest or level a mountain.
Exactly. But a helipad requires a fraction of that physical footprint. It allows the connectivity network to penetrate into the most geographically unforgiving pockets of the country without requiring massive terraforming.
That's amazing.
But this raises an important question. Servicing those extreme environments introduces a whole new set of technical hurdles. You obviously can't land a standard Boeing or Airbus jet on a mountain helipad.
Right. So the 2026 update tackles that directly through the strategic deployment of indigenous aircraft.
Yes.
The reports specifically highlight the use of HAL-drove helicopters and Dornier planes. That's a clever closed-loop system. You're using native tech to solve a native geographic problem.
The Dornier 228 planes, manufactured locally by Hindustan Aeronautics Limited, are fascinating machines.
Really? What makes them so special?
They are unpressurized, twin turboprop utility aircraft, specifically famous for their short takeoff and landing capabilities, or
Estonia. Yep.
yeah, they are rugged workhorses designed to drop onto short, unpaved runways in bad weather.
Perfect for what we're talking about.
Exactly. And the HAL-Dhruv helicopters are highly advanced, multi-role choppers designed specifically to operate in the high-altitude environments of the Himalayas.
Oh, wow. So UDAN is no longer just a scheme to subsidize ticket prices anymore.
No, it's evolved way beyond that.
By intentionally utilizing the HAL-Dhruv and Dornier aircraft, the government is actively stimulating India's own domestic aerospace manufacturing sector.
Exactly.
They fund the routes, which creates the demand for travel, and they fulfill that demand by purchasing aircraft built by their own engineers, which creates thousands of high-tech manufacturing jobs.
It's brilliant.
It is infrastructure acting as a catalyst for multiple industries simultaneously.
It creates a sovereign aviation ecosystem. You are no longer solely reliant on importing specialized aircraft from foreign manufacturers to solve your own domestic infrastructure challenges.
Yeah. So to bring all of these moving parts together, what we're looking at with the UDAN scheme is the engine behind a genuine travel revolution.
Undoubtedly.
They looked at a map of 1 billion people, identified millions who were isolated by harsh geography and basic economics, and they used clever financial tools, specifically viability gap funding, to rewrite the rules of the market.
Yeah.
They are turning neglected, weed-covered World War II airstrips into vital, pulsing lifelines for millions of travelers.
It fundamentally changes how an entire generation interacts with the concept of distance and opportunity.
It really does.
Okay.
So to you listening, the next time you open up an app or use a tool like Skyscanner to hunt for fares, or look at one of those sprawling route maps in the back of an in-flight magazine, remember what you're actually looking at.
It's not just lines on a page.
Exactly. You aren't just looking at a menu of travel options. You are looking at a living, breathing network that was intentionally designed to democratize access to the world, a map that is finally starting to light up in the dark spaces.
It stands as a profound testament to the power of targeted, collaborative public policy.
It really does. And I want to leave you with this final thought to mull over or explore on your own.
Okay.
We just spent this time exploring how a targeted subsidy scheme, a really smart funding mechanism,
Hmm.
completely redrew the travel map and the economic potential of a nation.
Yeah.
It unlocked unprofitable skies and turned them into arteries of growth. So if a policy like that can solve the brutal geography of aviation, what other vital sectors in our society are just one smart funding mechanism away from a total revolution?
That's a great question.
Think about rural healthcare access, or high-speed internet in forgotten towns, or even localized food distribution. What other massive, seemingly unprofitable challenges are just waiting for their own version of viability gap funding? Something to think about the next time you look at a map. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.